Welcome everyone to NAM. Thank you for Showmakers. Thank you for Jen Kellogg and her entire team for having me and such wonderful special guests here to touch on riders today. We're going to be talking about what goes into the rider, the intricacies, what makes a rider special, the relationships between what makes a rider important going into your show day and getting all the nuts and bolts out before you bring your entire team into a new city for a show. To get things started, we're going to do general introductions between myself and all the panelists. I will start with myself. My name is Mark Clark. I'm based in New Orleans, Louisiana. I have been working in the music business for 10 years. I've worked with electronic artists. I've worked in rock. I've done tours in North America, South America, Asia, Europe, you name it. I've done it from domestic to international. Whether it's bus tours or flying, kind of have my hands in a little bit of everything. But now I'm going to pass the torch off to our other panelists to get their introductions in, and we'll get the ball rolling.
Hi, I'm Debbie Taylor, and I'm a production coordinator. My main roles are taking care of the requirements of the crew, getting them from place to place, venue to venue, making sure that all of their work requirements are covered so that they can tour effectively and efficiently. I've been lucky enough to work with some of my favorite bands, including Guns N' Roses, AC/DC, Rolling Stones, Black Sabbath, and U2.
Hi, I'm Steve Gordon. I am a production manager. I have been in the industry for 20 years or so, and I also have toured pretty much all over the world, Europe, Asia, North America, obviously. And I've spent most of my time in alternative and rock music. There's people such as the White Stripes, Florence and the Machine, Mumford & Sons, etc. I'm glad to be here.
Wonderful to have you. And we will be moving over to Alex. Alex, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Howdy. I'm Alex Prince. I got into the music industry through studying at USC. I got a minor degree in the music industry, but got the touring bug and have been doing it since graduation. I've been to 30 countries since starting. My most recent gigs include production managing a live stream studio for the Biden-Harris campaign, and then tour managing A$AP Ferg, a hip hop artist, and production coordinator for Tyler, the Creator, for the last 2.5 years or so.
That is great. And as we round out our introductions, Mr. Steve Lopez, how are you doing?
Doing fantastic. Hello. I started back. I've been in the music business for over 20 some years. I started as a production assistant and moved my way up to a tour manager. I work for a band called Watch Red Panic and have worked with others and have toured in Europe and Asia. And I've also worked at music festivals such as Bonnaroo, Outside Lands, and Forecastle.
That's great. Now that we've gotten through our panelist introductions, let's start out with what is a rider to get this conversation started. There are so many vast types of riders, but to get specific about it, we are looking at your production rider, your hospitality rider, your catering rider, your security rider, hotel rider, etc. There's so many specifics on each department and how our day is going to run as smoothly as possible and what the importance is of what needs to go into each rider. I'm gonna pass it to Steve Lopez to talk a little bit about the brief history of riders and how we got here.
Yeah. The history of riders, I don't know exact dates or whatnot, but I know that it started way back with theater, dance, and believe it moved on to rock and roll. It's pretty much a series of requests, or in some cases people call them demands, that artists require to be able to do their performance. Riders are primarily fulfilled by the promoter or the hosting venue. And, in the past, the riders have become, what they are today because, I don't know, it spans over security to hotel riders to hospitality riders. There's so many different aspects of a tour that each department has specific needs that need to be met by the said promoter or the venue, and that's pretty much it. You hear about the stories of back in the day when, like, I think you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, because I think there's so many different bands that jump into this, but I believe it was Van Halen when they required for a bowl of M&Ms to exclude the brown ones, and that made it so the production manager could walk into the venue, notice this bowl of M&Ms, and if they saw brown ones, then they would immediately know that they didn't read the rider necessarily, but if all the brown ones were missing, that they read the rider and they fulfilled it properly. And I believe Debbie has a little something to add here. So, Debbie?
I believe that the purpose of having a rider is when we tour, we can't do our job alone. We have to work in partnership with the venue, the festival that we're going to. We just roll up on the day of the show or on a load-in day with the expectations of certain needs being met. The rider facilitates that and allows us to work together with whoever's going to provide that to make sure that our needs are met and the show can actually go up. So list of requirements, list of needs, list of demands. The rider states what we need in order to be able to do our show.
Exactly.
I think it's important to note that this rider isn't just something that we send out and then show up on our day of show expecting it all to be perfect. This rider is a formal extension of the contract, but it also works in tandem with what we call the advance process of communicating with the venue, communicating with the promoter. There's an ongoing conversation that needs to happen before a tour can show up to a venue and be running smooth and make an actual performance happen. So this works in tandem with that advanced process. It's not one or the other. They aren't the same thing, but they do work very much in tandem together.
Steve, Mr. Gordon, can you talk to us briefly a little bit about what gets included in a rider?
Sure. So first thing we have to probably address is that because of the different riders, different people actually create them. And tours that I've done, the production rider is something that I do in combination with the tour manager, because the production rider covers basically the building requirements, what we need when we're in the building, when we're at the building. So parking, for example, we need local runners or catering assistants, like a piano tuner, if we need piano tuner, backstage requirements, the internet access, how many dressing rooms we need, how many offices we need, towels, shower access. These are all things that you don't realize that things have to be discussed, because when they're not, it just goes very poorly for everyone on the road. Usually the crew takes it the hardest, as Debbie, I'm sure, will agree to. There's nothing worse than finishing an 18-hour day and there not being enough towels. So it's really an important aspect to really go through this in detail with the promoter reps and the venues. That also, and then it goes into the production rider also will include technical details. Now, depending on the level of tour that you're at, it'll either specify what you need provided: audio consoles, speaker systems, lighting consoles, video camera packages, etc., or LED screens, as it may be, if you're not carrying that stuff with you. If you are carrying it, as most tours that are doing arenas or stadiums, you'll explain what you're carrying, just an overview of what you have, and let them know what you do need from them. For instance, you may be not carrying your stage. A lot of times you'll use the venue provided stage, but they need to know what size it is, how high it is, where it needs to be placed off the back wall, if you need wings or not. You need to give them your front of house details, things like that. You also need to go over your local labor requirements, how many stagehands you need, how many riggers you need. And then in addition to that, so that's sort of the production rider, I think. And then sometimes included in that would be security. If the tour does not have a dedicated security person, if it does have a dedicated head of security, that person will likely have their own rider. They'll reach out to the promoter reps directly to give it to them. So that's the production rider that I tend to deal with mostly. Then there's the catering and hospitality riders. Catering meaning meals for band and crew, and then hospitality meaning backstage dressing room things where the green M&M stuff, or sorry, brown M&M thing comes in. So I don't know, Debbie, do you want to talk a little bit more about because a lot of times that's those riders will be done with the tour manager and the production coordinator, because they sort of are back there more than the production manager is.
Yeah, so we work in tandem with management and the artists to work out what their requirements are in regard to hospitality. Work out what they want in their room, what they need to be able to do a successful performance. That changes. Usually as the tour goes on, their requirements change. Most people don't like the same things every day. And then catering, we do the same thing. We tend to have a standard rider. It will change in the advance process, but it's allowing the local caterer, if you're not carrying catering, to be able to set up the meals that we require, again, to be able to fuel the engine that is the crew and the artists before they get on stage. Most of that's put in a rider, it's templated, and then we go into the finer details in the advance process. We also have, on bigger tours, a hotel rider too. I think technically, we have riders that cover everything that you can't do personally, because most tours don't have an advance person on the road. Riders are required to set your needs in advance so that when you rock up, you know that at least people have a guideline of what your expectations, what your needs are going to be.
I'd like to jump in there as well. Touching on the hotel rider, I'm fortunate enough to work with a band that loves to do multi-night runs, and in certain situations, they do send myself or a security person in advance to hotel riders to go over what their needs are at the hotel, and if not, the security issues at the hotel. So besides having riders that are specific for the venues, for an artist, it can go all the way from point A to point B throughout their tour. So meaning the riders will cover the venue. It'll also cover their travel, with the hotels included right there. So the rider's a big thing, and it's sometimes it's evolving and changing. For the most part, it is what it is from point A to point B, but it will change throughout legs. So yeah. Alex, I believe you can touch more about riders and how certain promoters like to redline them and what's negotiable or what's not.
Alex, you're muted. You're muted. There you are.
Sorry about that. I even like to I like to make the note between my show hospitality catering rider and make sure that they know, and I have it as one of my top lines, that these are really the basic minimum expectations. We can do more, we can add more. If your venue wants to treat us, we're all for it. But at the end, the absolute minimum requirements we need to actually make the show happen. And then in contrast, touching on that hotel rider, I like to take a note on there that this is really the final of what we have. A lot of my artists, I'm able to pick their rooms and have certain accommodations in there chosen for my artist. I don't want the hotel last second upgrading them to a different room. If I picked the room because it had a bathtub or had a separate sitting area, I don't want the hotel to go ahead and upgrade and change all of that. I've had issues with hotels trying to leave gifts for my artists who don't like it in there. So the rider really just specifies, again, what should you do? What are the minimum requirements? Or just letting them know and having it in a hard copy. We're happy with what we have. Please don't do anything else. Which then, yeah, brings us to the line item, negotiable items. Obviously, there's the discussion of what costs cover which requirements, and we'll be able to get into that later. But really, artists can ask for green M&Ms, and a promoter can strike it out. Not every artist is going to walk away and just cancel the show, but some have decided that it's endemic of a larger scale issue there. Some artists, if you can't provide a few things, or if you're in Europe or Asia and they don't have your specific brands, it would be good to have some fruit. It would be good to have some coffee and a tea set up. Not every artist is going to come in and throw a fit and cancel a show because of any sort of item there. But really then, as we touched on with the many different types of riders, you can't cancel out the power needs of the stage. You can't cancel out certain different things. So again, with this being part of the advanced process and it being a back and forth conversation, it really lays the groundwork and puts everything into writing of what you want, and then you can go from there. Each different show can take out items here and there. Not every show will look 100% the same, but it's at least got the same exact groove.
I think that's a really important point to make, that the rider is an extension of the contract. So once we get a tour, the contract is signed, and then we issue the rider. The rider puts into effect all of the smaller details that we think we are going to need to be able to make that show happen. We're going to be the people who, in the end, learn what is expendable and what isn't, what can be dropped and what can't. And it's our job to be able to communicate that to somebody in that advanced process. The rider goes out, everybody can read it, everybody can get over what we need to be provided. And then the smaller discussions start of, as Alex said, we can't get this brand in South America, we can't get this brand in Australia. But rather than us turning up on the day and realizing that it isn't there and that is a deal breaker item, we can actually start that process in advance. If it's going to South America and realizing that we don't have ground cover or rain cover or things that are actually essential for the show, we need to know that as soon as possible. And that's where the rider sets that out. Then we start the conversation process, and that's where relationships are built and successful shows are made.
That's a really great point, Debbie. And also, we've just been talking about this throughout countless conversations throughout the years, that just the relationships are definitely going to determine certain areas of where you can navigate your rider, what you can really kind of push for and know what to cut back. And obviously, you're not going to take your arena rider into a club show. So and that's another point that we'll jump onto here shortly. But the variances between riders, you may only need one sheet for a club show that might not have literally anything that you would normally bring into your top tier main headliner show. And I know that was a point, maybe to go back to Steve, I'd love to hear your variances on how you navigate from having your big arena level show, and then when you go, because I know you had mentioned with some of your clients that they like to do little theater shows and kind of dial it back a little bit and fluctuate between that, correct?
Yeah, that is correct. It's it gets challenging when you have multiple sized venues on on the same tour. I've done a couple where I started at clubs in Europe, and then in the middle of that we had like 3 huge arenas in Germany because the band was really popular in Germany and they were just breaking in other areas. So it's like literally you have the tour started with 1 truck, you know, with the essentials, sound, audio consoles and lighting desks and the instruments, and then I had to send 6 trucks full of lighting and staging and stuff to do the arenas, and then another crew bus and all that stuff to just do these like free arena shows, and then we went back to the clubs. From a rider perspective, basically that tour I ended up doing 2 riders. I did one for the smaller venues, and then I did a separate one completely because they're basically 2 completely different tours. So yeah, it's and then sometimes like when the band just decides they want to do an underplay, you know, it's just there is no rider. You just call, you know, you just call them up and you just say, look, this is what we need, this is what we're bringing, and you know, you sort of get back to the basics. You know, when you know it's pretty interesting to think about, and this is just sort of touching on the advanced process, which which we've said many times. I guess the rider is the beginning of that process. It's sort of like it's the thing that you send so that when you make your phone call, you're both looking at the same piece of paper, the same starting point, essentially. And if you think about technology now, like where we are, how we're working in the industry, riders have also become more essential because of technology, because of everything that keeps the industry keeps growing, and hopefully will continue to grow once we get through all this. But back, you know, in the brown M&M days, you know, that was probably before fax machines. So it really did come down to, and could have been probably before cell phones. So I mean, when you were doing tours then, you know, there were no emails. It was all literally like you sent this piece of paper out, like physically, or the agent probably sent it by mail, and then you had to get on the phone and have this discussion. So, you know, and that was when you'd stop, you know, the production managers and the tour managers, you know, were using, you know, they had sacks of quarters so they could make phone calls, you know, on the road when the bus stopped. So anyway, it's a bit of a digression, but it's just interesting to think about as we sit here having our virtual conference, just how much technology has influenced our industry.
And thank God for technology. I'm very grateful for email and cell phones and the internet.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I used, oddly enough, on the last campaign that I did in 18, 19, I had started using Zoom. The production designer introduced us to Zoom, and the band and we all started using it and used it throughout our design process. So because we were doing the screen sharing and all that stuff. So I agree with you 100%.
So you got a head start on Zoom.
I did, yeah. And so when this all happened, I was like, well, there's a stock to buy.
But I think it's a very important point that Mark and Steve have touched on in regards to different kind of riders, in regard to one tour can have several different types depending on the shows that you're actually doing. I know that when we take our arena or our stadium show down to South America, the rider changes drastically because we will not take all of our gear with us. We rely on the locals to provide a lot more of the production items. So a lot more of that goes into a rider. And that's the same for a festival rider too, where a lot of bands, unless you are the headliner, you are not going to take all of your gear. You're either going to share gear, or hopefully the festival will provide some of that gear for you, or you'll take a smaller show.
And in addition, at festivals, a lot of times you'll be adjusting things because you have less personnel, or dressing room requirements change and things like that. So it is, I think, and this goes along with a little bit about your updating. There are natural, I think we had discussed previously that usually the rider goes out and you don't send, people don't necessarily send updates. The updates are done through the advanced process and speaking or emailing and communicating that way. But there are natural places where you can adjust the rider that makes sense, such as a lot of times a touring campaign will start, in arenas in the December or the fall and spring, and then festival season comes. So you've learned what you've learned doing the production, during the arena run, and then you get into festival season, and that's a natural point to send out. You're changing the rider because of festivals anyway, and you revise it to reflect the changes that you've learned about the tour. The flip side of that is, a lot of times, since this is an extension of the contract, as we said, the agent will want your rider before you're ready to before you have all the information you need to be able to give them. So you start to learn to, you discuss with the artist what they plan. Are they going to play, in the round? Are they going to be end stage? Things like that, the big picture things. But then you just sort of get to know, like, okay, well, I know how many trucks I'm going to have based on, well, I know PA takes a truck and a half, and the lighting system that it's going to take 3. And so you can sort of, because that's a lot of times, for some reason, promoters just base their offers on the number of trucks that the tour has. That is something that the agent wants to know, like, super, super early. So you start to get good at figuring that out, at least, a rough estimate.
Again, I think that's what we've gone back to about this just being a first step in the entire process. As Steve was saying, sending out a rider in advance has to be done, especially on the bigger shows where we need people to start working on gathering the things that we need very early on, or budgeting as well as gathering, and basing that on previous tours that you've done. Sometimes massive changes are made, but I think as long as that rider goes out with the proviso and the note saying this may change, it can be dealt with later on, at least by sending it out in some form or another. You get the ball rolling.
Yeah, I'd like to just chime in here about getting the ball rolling. Working when I'm not on the road with the bands that I'm working with, I have to, I'm fortunate enough to work, or maybe some will say unfortunate enough to work at festivals, but I work at Bonnaroo, and when, we'll have many size bands playing on the main stage, but if we have a main big headliner, we might receive a rider a year in advance, so we can take a look at it and see if we can provide what they need. If we can provide the security that they require, the staging, the lighting, the power. And if we can't, then we'll figure out a way to provide it for them if we want them bad enough. And that will be the first initial email, mail, fax, whatever it will be, sent from the agent saying this is what they're looking at. But it'll be told that we'll be sent another one later on down the road as the date gets closer to the festival, just so we know that we can do this, particular headliner or this show for this festival.
Yeah, just to point out for our audience who, crew may have a little bit more familiarity with our general protocol and processes, but for anyone who's watching right now, who's just generally curious and sitting in this conversation, a provisional rider will be sent out in advance from our agency who have something from previous tours. That's to get these deals and balls rolling, because they plan years in advance. After 1 year is already wrapping up, they already have a year set in stone. So it's important for us as tour managers. We'll do our due diligence to check years past, what has been sent out, any updates and planning that we'll have going into the year next. Just to kind of paint you a picture of like the processes that go into where our riders are being sent and passed around from years to years as we continue to move forward and build on them. But
I've been working with, just to hop in on that point, one of the artists that I've been working with, hopefully shows come back sooner than later, but a number of festivals are looking to book, and our agent has been asking for an updated rider just so that he or she knows what to even be asking the festival for when making the deal. They want to know what our expected crew transportation and everything else looks like. But the rider is the extension of more than even just the artist. It extends out to management. It includes the agent, and it is helping our agent make the deals necessary for festival season going forward anyway. So it's the rider is important before the show even gets booked for some cases.
But Alex, that's a really good point, and Mark too, that provisional riders can go out and then riders can be sent out updated. It's very important to keep track of which rider is being used, because if you're using one and the festival stroke promoter venue is using a different one, it can lead to all kinds of trouble. And that's where formatting your rider and having some kind of identifiable marking on your rider is probably one of the most important things that you can have.
Should we go ahead and just look at a rider together then?
That would be awesome.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. Let's move over to showing our audience what an actual rider looks like and kind of cross through them.
Cool. If you guys could let me know if this screen share starts happening.
We can see it. There we
Looks
are.
pretty good. All right. So this is an actual rider that I have used. Obviously just took out the logo and the artist name out of respect to that artist. But really the format and everything else stayed the same. And this, as you can see, was a rider that I was using and updated back in January of 2019, which then goes to show, should there have been any additions prior to this or anything later, I would automatically be able to know and work with the venue or whoever is in charge of this. But I say venue mostly because this is the hospitality and catering rider. But there isn't a certain set of agenda or certain requirement of items that I think riders have. They are unique to each tour. So there are certain things on this rider that would not be necessary for others. And I think it's reciprocal that way. But just even, I like to start out with a very brief intro, really set the mood before all of the requests start happening. Different ground transpo requests, hotels. This one, on a US tour, obviously the artist is booking, or the tour manager and production coordinator are the ones booking the hotels. But this was, we had a few festival dates in the middle of our tour. So this was really able to just be a general note for everybody. And really highlighting how important it was for cleanliness throughout it. But really, more than the specific items on here, I think it's mostly just important how everything is laid out. I wanted to have a very nice, easy, clean look going forward. I didn't need it to be wordy. I didn't need it to be fluffy. To me, making it look pretty but 20 pages is wasteful when it could be short, concise, and 4 or 5. But we'll be able to talk about the different types of riders. I'm not sure if you guys have all seen the different photo riders that have been available. I know that I've worked with some where instead of having lines of each thing, it's an actual photo of the required hospitality good. That especially helps in Europe when sizing can be different or anything else. And really, if the artist is picky about anything, making sure that they get what they want. And on here, again, just the attention to detail, making sure that the venue knows which very important items are. So when they do come back with the conversation about what they can or cannot provide, whatever is very important to the artist will likely not get taken out. It kind of leaves breathing room should anything else need to be removed for cost or for availability. It kind of shows that I'm more than happy to have that conversation, but probably don't take away the alcohol yet. And then it also includes any sort of after show food here. When I'm on the road, and I'm sure Debbie has her own phenomenal system, this was a very brief one. I have a separate conversation with every catering company that we work with. So there was no reason to really put a ton of lines here if I'm going to have a separate conversation, if we're going to go into detail further. I also really enjoy local cuisine, so I'm not going to pigeonhole them into forcing every Sunday is hamburgers and hot dogs. I'd rather it be an open conversation and see if we can get some local flair in there. And then it's pretty easy after food and everything else. So there's all this, and then I'd be happy to pull up an updated festival rider to look at as well.
Can I just, before you do that, Alex, I just want to say that it's a great example of a rider. It's clean and it's concise. I think the more that you add into the first initial rider that goes out, the more is lost. If you can just stick to the points and make it like a go-to list, the chances of you getting what you need or getting your point across is much higher.
Absolutely agree with that. And so here I took the same skeleton from that last rider. As we've mentioned, it's kind of a living document. It continues to grow. It continues to change season by season, all of that. But I will always have the updated version here. And I enjoy putting the page numbers. That way the venue knows if they are missing a certain document. I never need to wonder if they've missed out entirely on something, because everything in this rider is important. There's not a single page that I would feel comfortable omitting and walking into a show later on. But as you can see, it really looks the same as we've updated it. We've added an inclusion bit and something here for green touring. I would love to touch on all of those topics in a little bit, but right now, just as we have the visual up, you can really see. And this was after our tour happened, so I was really able to gear it towards festivals and really be specific rather than being broad with it all. Still have the important allergen information, but here our agent was sending the rider out prior to our arrival, and not too much had changed. We also knew what our production pack was looking like, and it's rather simple. So in this festival rider, we had everything together. We weren't really finding out, well, we're not really negotiating catering anyway, but we wanted the festival to have all of the information about our tour as possible. Going here, we added wardrobe. Pretty simple, and it is usually a single person who will help with wardrobe that's separate from everybody else. They can just be given this entire page. Same with our artist liaison for festivals. They can look at our dressing room trailer requirements. In this, we were typically getting a compound where we had 3 separate trailers away from the rest of the artists getting a single one. But really, the most important part is just keeping it clean, keeping it readable, being able to see when the venue, festival, promoter comes back and has to cross anything out. It's obvious. Hopefully it's in a red line, but if not, it's going to stick out from the rest of the format. Everything can be negotiable. And yeah, this is really just the start of the conversation, but this is how I have done it.
I think that's really, really important, especially on a festival rider, to have everything very clear and concise and editable. Steve Lopez, you'll probably agree with me. I know in regards to festival hospitality, when you get multiples of these, like hundreds of them, actually being able to go through with a red line, me for hospitality, you for production, and actually let somebody know what they are getting and what they aren't getting, or what you can provide and what you can't, in a speedy manner, is really important.
Absolutely. I've come across we get the rider, and if it's nice and laid out like Alex's, you can see that there's a hospitality section, and there might be a hospitality person that you need to advance with. So you go over that immediately, and you start going through what you can and cannot provide, and you want to let that tour know, or you want to, or if you are that tour, you want to know what they can provide or what they can't. Because if you're doing a festival out in the middle of nowhere, you might want to bring in the flavored Perrier bottle of water that you got in Evansville, Indiana, and provide it for yourself if they're not going to provide it for you at the festival. So definitely it's a must to see what they are redlining, and meaning what they cannot provide you, and what they can provide you.
That's a really great point to make, and that it just comes over time with experience. You know what will work, and between your relationships, what your teams on the other side of the fence can really do for you, and what's a non-negotiable. You know, like Alex said, there are some things that he doesn't feel comfortable going to a show with, things coming off that rider that sometimes you just got to cut it down to your bare essentials. And most points, even though on paper some of these things do look like a lot, they are bare essentials. And depending on what class or level of your artist, those are not non-negotiable at this point, you know, depending on what your deal structures are going into shows. What other point was I trying to make as before we step into what makes a good rider? You know, I lost my train of thought, but I'm going to pass it over to Steve to get us started on what makes a good rider, and how riders look good instead of sloppy.
Well, I'm sure. Thanks, Mark. I'm sure everybody can jump in and give their 2 cents on this. And being on the festival side, at times I've seen some amazing riders, and I've seen not so great. You know, I've had ones. Someone took a picture of a handwritten note of what they wanted and sent to me. But you know what? I got something that at least I can go by. A great rider to me is something that is like Alex's, which is stamped. So I know if it's the most updated version or whatnot. If it's a bigger tour, then I'd like to know which departments I'll be needing to advance with, and which person I might be needing to contact. Because getting a rider and then making multiple phone calls to either the production manager or the tour manager, at a certain point, I believe the production manager, tour manager might be like, hey, have you read this thing? You can see who you need to call about the hospitality. You need, there's a person that you could advance with security, etc. So knowing who to speak to in certain, sections of a rider, and having it time stamped and laid out in a very, in a very easy way makes for a great rider. And then in the end, it makes for a great show and a great day at that venue or at that festival.
I like to add the saying, help me help you. Nothing's worse than getting a full book rider and someone's just like, oh, you have to navigate this whole thing. You're making your life and day it could be a little rocky, because if you have a house that's super slammed running shows and you send them a novel, there's going to be loose ends that you really are going to have to cover a lot of things. So like going back to Alex's rider, super clean, super detailed, easy to navigate. It's going to make your life and your show day a lot smoother. To keep our conversation going, I'm going to touch on what kind of extra tidbits or extra bits can your rider touch on, and how does that set the tone for an upcoming show? Do you personalize it or keep it based? I think kind of touching on things that we've already touched on. What other bits of your rider can you change, and how does that set the tone? I would say depending on what size of show, you're going to really know what your rider is going to have to, where you can make those altercations, whether it's vehicles, how many crew you're moving, the little things that help your team get in and out and safely in the right manner. Debbie, I'd love to have you kind of chime in as well, and how you kind of navigate, like changing little things on your rider that may or may not be needed.
Yeah, I certainly have some opinions, some very strong opinions on what makes a good rider too. I think Alex mentioned this before, that the rider is a living document. It gets updated, it does change. And certain things, as your tour goes on, become more important. And that's usually found out through experience, when things get dropped or things get forgotten. And usually the rider gets updated with that. I've seen many riders where things are underlined, or they're bold, or they're in a different color. And that's usually because at some point they've been forgotten or they are essential. I think the problem becomes when your rider becomes so busy with those colors and underlining and the bold that you completely lose the point. So I think it's really important and a little lazy for us if we haven't done it to actually update the rider and make it concise, but with those points highlighted without it having to be a glaringly obvious piece in there. Also, my other pet peeve with riders is we all do share rider formats. In the industry, we all talk. When you see an amazing rider, you will, out of respect, ask if you can steal bits and pieces from somebody's rider or their formatting. But when you do that, it's to actually proofread your rider before it goes out. There is nothing worse than the copy and paste version where the artist at the beginning doesn't match the artist at the end, or the production manager's name is different. Or I think for a rider, we're really setting the tone of how professional we want to be, how we want to be taken seriously. And I think that really starts with having a well-presented, well-thought-out rider.
That is
Having
a
a good
wonderful
rider.
point. No, keep going, Alex.
Sorry. Having a good rider is also extremely helpful for the production team. I know I'm not alone in getting to a venue or getting to a festival and they're loading in hospitality for the artist that's playing 2 nights later. And so just the idea of having your artist name on there or having a watermark across the page, it could save a lot of time and effort going on later for the artist side as well. So taking the time to make it look good, taking the time to make it clean ends up saving me and us, the production team, a lot of time later on.
Yeah. I've also had the rider before that is a stream of conscious thought, where it's not sectioned, where, you know, it jumps from production to hospitality to then there's another line of this included at the end. If you're expecting somebody to provide things for you, make it as easy as possible as you can. That way you're more likely to get exactly what you need, or at least raise the questions.
Yeah, just to paint a picture, sorry, just to chime in one second, just to paint a picture for our audience, there's so much more variables and relationships that go into the rider. And when we're sending this rider out, the person on the other side of the fence will know exactly who they're dealing with when they look at that rider, you know. So it's very important to throw that note out there that what we're seeing on our side as a tour manager is putting those things into account as well when we're building out these riders, and the relationships, again, going back to relationships with how we jive and how we go into setting the tone, like Debbie was saying, is that we definitely know who we're dealing with based on the industry and who we're working with on a day-to-day basis. I digress and pass it over to Steve.
Well, I mean, Steve Lopez, you've probably seen more riders than all of us put together. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, so obviously you must form a first impression. I mean, I agree with everything that Debbie and Mark are saying, that I definitely consider the rider you want it to give, you know, again, a good first impression. And so does that happen to you when you get it?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it happens. It happens quite a bit, you know. I can get a rider and things can be forgotten really easy because, you know, at a festival, if you're a headliner, you're going to be treated, you know, a little bit better than maybe the opening act, and they're going to try to go out of their way to provide what you need. But that rider needs to be, you know, I believe it needs to be marked, whether it's been updated, and it needs to be, I think, as a production manager and a tour manager, having worked at a festival, I know to go to a festival and divvy up my rider, you know, send one to the security or send one to the production team, but know that it's going to be, I think, you know, Debbie and all of us, we talked about how sometimes the rider can be divvied up into people who work at the festival. So let's say if you're working and you're looking at a hospitality rider and you're working, you know, the dressing rooms might be included in that, and you require 2 dressing room people. And that could be easily forgotten because those 2 people might be part of your production advance on who you require at load in or at 2 p.m. But that hospitality person might not necessarily know that you require those 2 people because they don't see the entire rider. So I think just being thorough and making sure that, hey, if you're working with a security team and you need 4 dedicated guys, make sure that, hey, you're going to let the festival person know, or the promoter, you're going to advance security with this person, but you're going to need to provide them this many people, and please call them at so-and-so phone number, or email them. And the same thing with the hospitality or dressing room or, parking people or whomever you're advancing with, just being thorough, laying out what you need, even if it has to be multiple times, and I think I probably said missing the dressing room people because I have forgotten to provide a headliner with, a seamstress or whatnot, because it wasn't laid out. If I had read the production rider in its entirety, I probably would have seen it, but I didn't see it because I was specifically just looking at the backstage requirements, and I gave them everything they needed minus that person. I was able to find them that person, but just being thorough, making sure that they have the updated, and, I think you touched on it earlier, Steve, picking up the phone and just calling them, nothing better than just going over it with on a phone call, if not on a Zoom call.
Yeah, I completely agree. So I wanted to, Alexander touched on it briefly in his rider. There was the green eco-friendly sort of clause that he had, which is something that I know a lot of the artists that I'm working with now are taking very seriously, and are doing whatever they can to really get into trying to make the tours as eco-friendly as possible. And that, in some cases, in my last tour, we actually had a dedicated person on the tour with us, who we carried our own recycling containers so that we could recycle in all the backstage rooms that we'd set up every day. We carried water stations and gave everyone water bottles. We used boxed water for the water for the crew, the local crew, so there were no plastic bottles, and we used boxed water on the buses. I guess something that people should know is that water is like gold on a tour bus. So you can't not have water in containers, but and using water dispensers on a bus doesn't really work very well. But boxed water was our solution. But we had to have it. I mean, and it comes at a cost. It comes at it's something that we developed a partnership with a company, but we had to have pallets delivered to the venues that we then put on our trucks and carry with us to move to use at different venues, for the next 3 gigs. And then we had another pallet delivery. So we were very actively doing this. The issue comes though when so you put that in your rider, and you explain how you want biodegradable utensils if you're using anything like that, and you want and you go through all this composting stuff and all that, and you separate all these recyclables, and then unfortunately, because of whatever happens, the infrastructure isn't in place in that locale or municipality, or the venue just doesn't want to deal with it. You're walking out after you're taking your shower, and the custodians are going through and just throwing everything that you separated into the same bin, and throwing it away. Unfortunately, there's not much that we can do about that, except to try to make our promoters aware that we're working really hard, and to get hopefully the buildings to start working hard, and hopefully they'll get better in the future.
I think the fact that you had somebody on the road with you to do that is an amazing thing, because I think a lot of times people expect the venues or the festivals to just do that themselves. There is the expectation that we as touring people don't have to do anything. It relies on other people. Unfortunately, it's still going to be best efforts, and you're still relying on the assistance of the venues to do that. But at least by having somebody yourself, you're taking that first step.
Yeah. I mean, well, I think much to Alexander's point is that the first step is definitely putting it, just putting it in the rider, like just, even if only a few venues adhere to the biodegradable stuff, you're starting the conversation.
There's also a point to be made that as more and more artists continue to adopt these things, venues who say no and don't have the infrastructure there, if 80% of their artists are asking for it, it might only take one person to say we're no longer doing our show there to make that change, or it's the overwhelming demand of artists asking for it. So yeah, it's a continued conversation, but putting it on the rider, I think we are able to push the boundaries more than just what will make our show happen versus what do we want our show and the environmental impact to be from it. How do we want to make the world and the community better around what our show
and
is
also
doing?
By showing that we as touring people are willing to help within that process, we're showing people that it's easier to do than they kind of expect. That sometimes it doesn't take a huge amount of effort, that it's a small change that needs to be made, but it would be easy to put in place.
I think leading by example is really what is spearheading this forward. The little things like adding these green initiatives to your rider is starting to press that initiative on these venues as we go from whether it's club, theater, arena, you name it. Those all come into another topic of conversation. But when it comes to riders, I think small steps make bigger action. From previous experience from this year, I know that we talked about it a little bit and on some of our prep, but a lot of venues that weren't ready to do recycling, we brought in all the resources and tools to not only show them how we do it, but how it can be done. And at settlement, a lot of those venues were like, we're going to start implementing these practices and start making those new steps to be recycling ready for other tours. So I think it's the small steps and I'm trying to think of the right word, just kind of the reenaction, like more artists apply that to their rider. You're going to start seeing that being more of a demand, and more venues, it'll be a trickle down effect where you'll start seeing those impacts over time, I think is an important thing to touch on.
One of the ones that we have that's got a big deal for us is food wastage, and trying to get our caterers involved in taking their food, if there is wastage, to places where it can be accepted. We're very lucky that a lot of caterers now have that facility, and they're the ones telling us about it, which allows us then to pass the information on to other places that we're going to as well.
I think all really great points. And to kind of get back onto some of our talking points for our audience, Debbie, I would like to pass it over to you to discuss a little bit about how a rider can set expectations of what a show tour wants versus the reality of what it'll feel like pulling up in a tour bus.
So for me, putting together a rider is one of the joys of touring. It's one of the documents that you can put together in the calm environment of your home or on another leg of a tour, where you can spend a little bit of time, hopefully, pulling it all together. That is in direct opposition to what happens when we turn up on show day or on loading day to a venue, where you're cranky, you're sleep deprived, you are in no mood to have to start the conversation from scratch. So being able to set your rider in peace and in tranquility, setting the scene for what you would like to happen when you roll in, gives you the time to get that right. Rolling into a venue first thing in the morning, especially after a show the night before, one of the most essential things is possibly to have breakfast ready. If your guys can roll off of the bus and into a venue and be fed, it sets the scene for a great, great day. We don't usually have an advanced person who can make sure that that is set. So we're relying on that rider and then the advanced process to make sure that happens. I'm sure we've all had it in the past where something's gone awry and we rolled off a bus and we walked into a venue and it looks like nobody's expecting us whatsoever. Nothing worse. Really sets the scene for a really, really bad day. So for me, being able to take the time with the rider and then having that relationship building advanced process fills me with confidence that when I get off the bus, what we've requested is going to be there. Usually a little finger crossed too.
I don't know how many times I've just like followed up on that email, followed up on that call, making sure that all the little fine details are all going to be met. And then you show up and you're missing a couple stagehands. Your breakfast that you ordered is kind of a little off. Nothing sets the present for just a rocky day, which I'm sure we've all experienced. I'd love to hear if anyone has anything else to add. Steve Lopez, Steve Gordon to add.
Well, I was gonna say, you know, just to touch base on that, you know, there's been times where I've been on a string of just one show that just was made, you know, a mess. The second show is a mess, and then the third show, I'm finally like, I'm picking up the phone and calling them and just calling the promoter or whomever, just saying, please make sure that you read the rider. We've had bad shows, and this is what's going to make our, you know, make our day and set the tone to a great day. So, you know, having the advance done well and making sure that everything's there for you will set the tone and set the scene for a good day. It can make or break a fun day. You know, there's also been times where you show up and it's a mess, but at the end of the day, we're all high-fiving and all friends again. So, well, it's a give and take.
It's taking any opportunity you can to be able to get it right, so that your day is left free to deal with the dramas of the day. They're going to come up anyway. Because as Steve Lopez was saying, no matter how well you do your advance, there's always going to be things that happen. And if you can save your time to deal with that rather than having to set the entire show from scratch, it's really going to help.
Sorry, I was muted there. I say we kind of keep the conversation rolling. Alex, would you like to talk to us a little bit about the financial considerations of the rider? Does that change what is included? Do you put pizzas or steak for after show food? I like that little note.
Yeah, and this is kind of just a stark transition from what we just talked about and how great it is walking into the venue and having a nice hot meal. But say tickets aren't selling, they needed to add production costs, and you just don't have the budget to have catering there from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. Sometimes you need to start pushing things. And that's everything we've talked about is about how the rider is what we want, but it does change depending on our circumstances. So yeah, if you're not doing well and as well as you thought you would at the start of the tour, you might be changing that A-party steak Ruth's Chris order to pizza for all buses. You might also start going to more continental style breakfast instead of an omelet bar. There's always considerations to be taken off, but we all know that if it's the omelet bar or A-party's alcohol, you should probably start expecting a cold breakfast each morning. So it's a give and take between everybody, depending on whether the festival is worried about money and asking to cut some hospitality, whether it's the tour and the promoter deciding that settlement isn't making as much as it should, and they're trying to figure out where they can kind of grab cash from other places. The rider may take hits, or if unexpectedly the tour is doing phenomenal, the artist has a new hot single, and you can actually go from continental up to an omelet bar. It all changes. It's all fluid. And it very much plays into, at the end of the day, somebody is paying for whatever you have on there. That needs to be accounted for in all stages. Hopefully you have a good idea when you create your first rider, but there will be new additions, there will be new requirements, and financial considerations very much play into that.
I think it's a really good point. Although the rider sometimes is a wish list, I think the realistic expectations need to be set when you send the rider out. I think we're all very flexible, and part of our jobs is being dynamic and being able to be adaptable and changeable. We are, at the end of the day, the gatekeeper between our bosses, our artists, and the promoter, the venue, the festival that we're going to. it's our job to be able to understand what is flexible and what isn't. Like if money needs to be saved, we are the ones that know what is a deal breaker and what is not a deal breaker in regards to both the show and the artist requirements. And it's being able to work together. Because again, as we say, it's all about relationships. And there is no way, me personally, myself, that I would want to charge money for things or be charged for many things that we don't actually need. Nothing worse than waste.
I like the point that Alexander makes about, at the end of the day, somebody's paying for some of it or all of it. And I worked for an artist before that, we only provided after show pizzas if we sold out the show. So knowing that my guys went on, 5-night run without any days off, I started to learn that there were certain items that weren't being touched or weren't being kept, or we weren't taking from the next show to the next show. So I decided to cut that out, and that savings, I took that savings and started providing my crew with after show food of some type after every show, because, in the end, I was taking what we were going to spend no matter what and reallocating it to after show. In the end, it would make the crew happy and end on a good night. And that good happiness moves forward, to the next day. So my 2 cents.
I would have to agree with Steve. I do the exact same thing. If you have extra funds that can be used to benefit your team and your crew and prep a better day, depending on how your deal structures are, because sometimes you are very limited on your resources and what you can do feasibly within your deal structure. So you start to really think outside the box of how your rider can work to benefit your entire team. In one city, you may not need everything, and you can allocate that to a city that you might not get that much, and you can put that extra to kind of balancing out your day and kind of rolling with it as it fluctuates. So I think that's a really great point that Steve made there. Sorry if you can hear an airplane coming over my building and shaking the entire building.
But I do think that's a very good point, that being able to look at your run of shows and being able to assess where you do want to spend the money, that, maybe you've got a festival in the middle of nowhere and the weather's going to be terrible and the facilities are going to be awful, versus the next venue you go to where it's going to be fantastic and you're going to be warm and the towels are going to be fluffy. Working out where you can save money and where you can spend money for the greater good, I think, is always really important.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I mean, because there may be shows where we're only going to be allocated half our resources, and then the next show is going to be double, endless resources. So I know I'm not going to need, or I should hold for that big day, really kind of cut it down to the nuts and bolts of what our riders are going to need to accomplish for this day, and take that extra and put it towards the next day or the next show that's going to need a little more assistance on that front. But as we keep going, or does anyone else want to add to the conversation? Alex?
Yeah, I've just got a final point for myself, at least. I know that we've talked about somebody has to pay for these items, but it's also a good note to figure out who it is exactly that is paying for it. If it's the catering company, they may make a bottle of water $3 each. So taking that 30-pack of water off of your rider, you can then go buy an extra couple bottles of wine for your tour bus because you saved $80 just buying a $6 pack instead. So with it being that conversation and figuring out where those costs come from, who they're coming from, are you splitting it with the promoter? Is the caterer trying to make extra cash off top of it? The tour can also always strike items. As a headliner, I'm constantly scratching items off of our opening acts if they're asking for too much on their rider, or I'll ask them to revise it because I need them to hit a certain price point instead.
That's a really good point in regards to, a lot of the time it's easier to scratch something from the rider than add something to the rider. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that, like your rider should be huge at the beginning. It should be realistic, but it is still always easier to take something off than it is to add later on.
Absolutely. And instead of, even having the rider and making sure that catering knows that I've had tours where we just cut after show food entirely, and I have the runner go do a Whole Foods pickup where they have the small wraps and deli sandwiches and soups and individual salads, and just going and buying 10 of each for each different bus costs less than a single night of after show food. And so my crew liked it because it was a little healthier alternative. And then with all of the money that we saved from catering, not providing after show food or not wasting pizza, we were able to do an end of tour party based purely off of the cost savings there.
There's also I've had it before on the hospitality rider where we've asked for a specific variety of wine, not an overly expensive variety of wine, but as Alex was saying, if you're not keeping an eye on it, one place you may be charged $20 for that bottle of wine, you get to somewhere else and it's unavailable and it's had to be ordered online, and suddenly you're paying $150 for a bottle of wine that's worth $20. By talking that through in the advance and being kind of aware of that, you can certainly drop that down to another $20 bottle of wine that can be replaced.
Yeah, I mean, the same thing goes a lot of times. There's a furniture specified in the rider, backstage furniture for dressing rooms, and that is another area where you really need to keep an eye on things, because the promoters will go out and rent. A lot of venues won't have furniture in house, or they will. The promoter decides that it's not good enough, or they have a deal with a local rental company. So you really, all of a sudden you're paying, $3,000 in couch rental when it's just, not necessary. So once again, just pointing on the fact that it's this document is a starting point for is a conversation in pretty much all areas, with the exception of things like I think Alex said, the power that you need is the power that you need, unless you want to start compromising the show. And, that's also, if you're in a position where ticket sales are not going that well, you can get into those conversations. If it's like, well, we really, if we bring a generator in for this, just because you want, this LED wall or something, you can have those conversations, and then that's when it's, ultimately could lead, not that this has happened to me, but I could potentially see it leading to an uncomfortable conversation with your artist, to seeing where they want to compromise. But like I said,
I love that you brought up furniture, because that's one of those bits that on my rider, having it nice and clean and the formatting of all the words and the titles and everything, furniture is where I love to throw in some photos. If you've got some sort of table that looks anything similar to what my photo has, let's just use that and not do the $120 rental. You got a sofa upstairs in a VIP lounge that looks like this. Do you need it for that lounge for this one show, or can we just pull it down? Furniture is one of those things where, again, going back to what makes a good writer or not, that's where I really like to throw in photos and see if we can get creative and use any sort of outside ideas. Even if it's a road case with a drape over it, if it looks like this photo that I have that I know my artist likes, let's just do whatever it takes to make that look similar.
I do the same, not so much in the rider, but in the advanced process for catering. I keep the rider nice and clean, but then I have a whole advanced document that does have photos of not exactly what we expect, but the level of catering that we're expecting for show days. I find that really helps. Visual stimulation is so much easier than words sometimes.
Yeah, I think photos go a long way, especially internationally, because everyone's trying to kind of like do their own system in their own way. And it's like, no, this is how it needs to be done. I think it's countless times that where photos have helped out in the long game, because you just start noticing that everyone's just going to try and nickel and dime in some capacity. And you really got to set the present for what it is. So that's another good example of how a writer can set a good day, set the tone for what our day is. The
photos for international shows, but also even college shows where you have students trying to set it up and they've got an idea of what what looks great in their dorm room is going to work great for the artist too. In regards to how far out, we've talked about how these writers are always changing. Steve Lopez, would love to hit back to you with how far out do you expect to see the writers? How would you rather get 3 different revisions of a writer from an artist camp, or do you just want one in advance and then conversations beyond it?
You know, I guess it depends. If you're a band that's going to play at 12 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon at the festival, and you're on a tour and you know exactly what you want, just send me that. You know, send it to me as soon as you have it, so I can have it, file it away, make sure that I have it. But if you're the headliner, you know, I don't mind seeing a writer A as far out as you can possibly get to me, so we can prepare and I can give the proper department heads a heads up, you know, hey, so-and-so's bass player wants to camp at the festival for the whole weekend, or, you know, we need to provide them security, or we need to provide them a safe spot to camp, or B, somebody wants to come in a helicopter, or, you know, just send it to me as fast as you can. If you need to make revisions, that's great. I just like to see it as far out as possible so we know what we're dealing with. And then make sure that this other writer that you might send is marked with the changes and, you know, the updated one, and know that I can destroy the other one, you know, in its entirety. If you're going to send me revisions, then I'd like to, at a festival, I'd like to see, I guess I'd like to see the writer in its entirety, what you're using, so I can destroy the entire old one that you sent, and I can just use that specific one. Because if you're if you're sending me changes, then, you know, there's a potential of pages might start getting mixed up or whatnot. So that's my preference. And, you know, then there's some bands that come in there and send me one writer, and it's so thorough and so great, and it has included pictures, and it has included like a little check off list. So, you know, in the end, I can, you know that every person that I have underneath me has done their job by clicking off what they need to provide the artist to have a smooth day. Yeah, so I guess it's back to you guys. How far out do you guys like to send writers? And I know that you guys might have different ways of like sending updated changes or whatnot, and that I'd be curious to know what you guys think on that.
I can start it off. You know, I always try to keep it as very detailed as possible. Whether it's a date change, I'll add that to the writer. I know Alex had noted some things that he had added into his writer where at the bottom it has little notes, whether it was an updated or if it's a new version. I tend to do that on the subject headliner too. So I'll always make sure my documents are either this is the most updated, or this is a version 2 or version 3, and if it's festival specific, or, you know, what venues it's tailored to. I try to be as specific as possible to help the other side of the fence. That'd be you, Steve, to make sure that you have all the information and have the most updated information, and it's not all getting mixed through the grapevine. So each document is updated specifically to that version and date. It's all dated, stamped, so that way you know what's the most up to speed. But that's kind of I'd say about a month out, you know, typically, depending on what kind of tour. And obviously festivals need, like, some festival advances will hit me like 2-3 months in advance. We have deadlines now. We need these documents as soon as possible while I'm in the middle of a tour. So that gets a little tricky when I'm in the middle of a tour, and then all these festival deadlines are all hitting my desk in the middle of that. But that happens too. So
it's even more tricky when you're not in the middle of a tour and you don't know what you're going to be bringing, which happens a lot. I don't know.
Yeah,
you know,
that happens quite a bit. You know, like, they don't even know what personnel they're bringing. They don't know how many people are going to be traveling with them. And I got my bosses screaming down at me trying to get a heads up, and I'm trying to tell them, and I'm on your guys' side as well, where I'm a tour manager myself, and I'm defending, saying, you know, they haven't even started the run. They haven't even started rehearsals. So there's been times where, because I'm a tour manager, I can somewhat put placeholders. You know, I know that they might be bringing 100 people, I know that they might, they're going to need catering or whatnot. So I'm able to work on my toes that way for sure, quite a bit.
I do think that it's completely invaluable to have a knowledge of both sides. As you're saying, it allows you to, one, respect the other side and know what they're going through, but also to be able to ask the questions that you can get the answers for. Like you say, with rough numbers for catering and rough requirements for backstage hospitality areas. Because a lot of times, I know going in as a headliner, sometimes that compound actually has to be made for us. And then it will suit the other headliners for the other days. But our requirements are bigger and larger than anybody else's. So therefore, the festival needs to know that to get that in place before they can move forward with anything else. With sending out the riders, I like to get the ball rolling, not as quickly as possible, but with more than enough time. I then like to, as we get our final requirements known a little bit more, I like to do it in conjunction with the festival, the promoter, the venue. Like, do they need an updated rider, or would they prefer to just see my catering numbers on a separate sheet? Do they need me to amend it so they have one file that they can send out to everybody, or are they happy to go through it in a phone call? I think sometimes if you can actually work that out together, it really helps and saves you both parties a lot of time.
Yeah, I think on the same page as far as that goes. I personally don't like dealing with catering at all, so I rarely do that. I leave that to my production coordinator as well. But yeah, I like to. I mean, the riders, as we've said earlier, the riders will go out with the agents will send the riders out when they're making the deals. My typical time to reach out and start the discussion is I try to aim for a minimum of 30 days. And that's when I will, send the rider again to make sure they have the latest version, and along with I'd have a 2-sheet advance that is essentially the rider boiled, like taking out all of the words. It's just like basically a spreadsheet that's like, labor calls, time, the show day schedule. It's very, very clean and concise, and everything they need to know is on 2 pieces of paper. Everything that we need to do that show is on 2 pieces of paper, and that's what I then work from that point out, because that I update all the time.
Again, I think everybody has a different way of doing it, and I think you learn over time what works best for you and what gets the optimal results for your artist and yourself. And again, I think having discussions like this and talking amongst ourselves always leads to interesting discussions and new ideas of how you can do it better and how you can improve on things.
100%. Couldn't have said it better myself. I just want to thank our audience. Before we hit on our last topic, which I'm excited to talk about with Alex, will be kind of innovation, the future of riders, the inclusion rider, which we'd love to talk to you a little bit about. But we would love to say thank you to our audience today for sitting in with us and listening to what makes a rider special, what's important about a rider, the intricacies of the rider, the relationship of the rider to us on the others, and the promoters, and the whole world of making our show start and work and operate. But I would love to pass it over to Alex to talk a little bit. And obviously between all of us, we'll talk a little bit about our ideas of where the riders are going. And we have talked a little bit about it today already, but let's take another look at it and talk a little bit about your inclusion rider.
Yeah, I think once the rider started extending beyond just production needs, once it got into hospitality, touring figured out how we could improve the lives of our crew members with having good catering, having that hot food in the morning, having certain snacks available in the production office, things that the show can continue on without, but that it really does make an impact on those who are touring. And I think that the future of riders is going to continue extending outside of just our small circle of who sleeps on and off of a tour bus. I think that riders can start to introduce the idea of philanthropic needs, of giving back, whether it's giving the leftover meals to a shelter or other places. I know that there are different rules in each city, but I think that riders, because they have so much weight of being the artist voice and the management voice as well, the fact that eco-friendly touring is now a mainstream idea, that it's something more people know about than don't. I think the next big thing that the writer is going to be able to discuss is the diversity of our personnel backstage. Being on mostly hip hop tours lately, I've heard comments about how the only staffing who's working backstage who looks like the artist is typically wearing a security shirt. And so in the example that I showed earlier and screen shared, just below the green initiative, or I think above it, was the equity, diversity, and just a whole idea of being inclusive backstage, in the front of house staff, and all over. And again, it kind of touches on the ideas of what is enforceable, what is not. Will an artist actually leave if the diversity makeup of the staff doesn't represent the full community at large? But it really might just take that one artist to leave. And as more and more people do kind of make sure that inclusion is a forefront idea, that it's not just an idea that we all want to do better, but it's out of our reach. When we start putting it on the rider, when we start making it a discussion, I think it puts us in a place where venues and promoters will start having to look at their kind of personnel makeup and whether it reflects the community around them or not. And the community looks different everywhere you go. It doesn't need to be cookie cutter, 50% this ethnicity, 30% that. I think that the conversation can continue, and I'm also not the person to have the final word on any of that. But if I can introduce it and start the conversation with different festivals, with different venues, then I would love to do that. And the inclusion rider is an idea and a concept that came out of my studies at USC. It was Dr. Stacy Smith who created it, and she did just an unbelievable holistic review and data breakdown of film and TV representation of underserved communities and underrepresented communities. And I think that, well, since then, a number of different film and TV production studios have adapted their own inclusion rider. And I think that there's no reason that the music industry can't be doing the same thing. Whether it's enforceable or not is a different discussion. Whether a tour bus would leave a venue or not is a different discussion, but at least we're having that conversation. At least we're pushing it forward. And so whether it is an inclusion rider or a charity portion of your rider where you demand that X amount of proceeds go to a local charity, I think that the riders have a wonderful opportunity to hold this weight that will affect the communities around us.
I completely agree. I think if the rider is making up a mission statement of what we want to achieve as a touring group, as an extension of the artist and for ourselves, I think that including things that are important to us is only going to get more important.
And when we talk about the inclusion rider, it goes beyond more than just race. It goes beyond gender and non-binary. It goes to physical and mental disabilities. It goes to any sort of stigma that we're traditionally afraid to touch, but have a real impact in our communities, have a real impact on the hiring process. I heard a term of neurodiverse today. And it was the first time that I heard that, but the fact that we're able to have these conversations and have a starting point from which we can improve on, I think is the most important thing.
I think it shows the true maturity of where our industry is going and what our team values, and that we truly deeply care about these cities and countries and continents that we're going into, and we want everyone to benefit. We don't want to just go into it carelessly and just throw a show and just be like, see you later. You know, we want our rider to impact the community. We deeply care about our community. Inclusive, I'm trying to say the right word, the equality of the teams and the venues and the people that live in these cities that we're going into. Our riders can make that difference, and that we keep to push this narrative over time can truly make a bigger difference for everybody.
It's an extension of we as a touring community, we as an individual artist touring community, but also the venue community, the bigger community, and an inclusive community.
Inclusion and diversity is something that I know tours are looking at, and we're looking to not just have the lighting guys, that all of our departments will be wildly diverse, as it should be. But as our tours are starting to hold that standard, I think it's only natural that we start to hold the venues and festivals that we play at to the same standards. And so that conversation may best be had from an agency or a promoter group. But until then, we're going to continue pushing it. And I will keep those few lines on our rider and hopefully expand on it, and hopefully continue learning more and hearing from all of the folk who need to be included and are currently underrepresented.
I would love to hear from Steve Lopez and Steve Gordon before we close. I would love to hear what y'all got going on. Anything in regards to the future of riders and what we've been touching on.
I think this is great. I think the conversation has started and it has begun in our camp and in the band that I normally work with full time. We started with, including making sure and being adamant that, the band that I work for is kind of known as a party band. And we wanted to make sure that we were including everybody, even those that do not like to party, meaning the sober folks. And so we started with, advancing, making sure that they had a spot and a safe spot and a safe place in the venue to hold meetings prior to the show and in between the sets. And then just learning from Alex and learning from you, Mark, and seeing what Steve Gordon's going to add, and Debbie is going to be even that much better and greater, knowing what to include, for as far as, race and gender equality, and what to just, to keep moving forward, because I think, it's something that should have begun a long time ago, which it did, but it's slowly starting to be brought forth out in much bigger and brighter light, which is fantastic.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, Alex, your point is very well taken, that, this is much like the eco-friendly thing has become more mainstream because artists started putting it as part of their riders. I think that this is going to help further this cause in the same way. It shows that we're all looking at it and trying to push the conversation forward. I also think there's probably, not to drift off the topic, but we're going to probably see a lot of COVID-19 clauses, which I think I saw in your current, right? There's something, I saw COVID something there in it. I think we're going to end up, I think we all want to get back to work sooner than later, but we also want it to be safe. And I think that the vaccine is certainly, I think, going to allow us to get there sooner. But I do believe that there will be protocols that we're going to be dealing with. And I know that, I know several people who have trained as COVID safety compliance officers online during lockdown. And I'm sure that there will be industry-wide things that will have to be put in place. But I just wanted to say that, unfortunately, that may be part of what riders look like in the future as well.
Even taking away COVID-19 as a whole, I believe that a lot of artists and their touring teams are going to be much more cognizant of just the health factor, especially at festivals when there used to be 20 trailers all facing each other. Now, do you have hand sanitizer? Do you have other requirements? During flu season, does anything look different? Hopefully, we don't need a pandemic in order to up our standards of safety and health.
Yeah, I agree. I think we can all agree that festivals were never the most hygienic places on the planet.
Oh, well, this has
No
been
idea
such a
what you're talking
wonderful.
about.
This has been such a wonderful conversation. Again, I want to thank Jen Kellogg with Showmakers and her entire team, and to Nam for having us to all come together and discuss riders. It's been such a wonderful time to sit with such incredible tour managers and production managers, people that really get why riders are important and what goes into riders and why we love what we do. We all can't wait to go back to work, but thank you to everyone that has been in attendance, to the audience, crew, and people that were just curious alike. Thank you for sitting in with us. This has been a wonderful experience, and we look forward to seeing you on the road. So we'll see everyone soon. Farewell.